And we're live. We're recording. Welcome back, everyone.
Hello. Hold
Well,
on.
welcome back to Art Is. Today, Danny and I are getting together. We're reading a longer book, so you'll have to wait until next week for a full book. But we're doing some poetry today. And this is our first time doing poetry, right, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important that, like, as, people that talk about literature, that we talk about poetry. Even though I think we've avoided it for good reason, because it kind of gets a really bad rap. Like, I think it gets a worse rap than um even like books with like high school, like with grade school children, I think they would rather read like The Great Gatsby or like To Kill a Mockingbird than ever have to deal with decoding a poem, you know? But they're not so scary. In fact, I actually think that they are quite informative and can be really cool and really interesting and really awesome. But it's understandable. It's understandable that, even poets hate poetry. Even Ben Lerner hates poetry, you know?
Really? Well, Ben Lerner's a poet, I guess, but he's also like an essayist.
He went to Brown for poetry, not for books, for poetry.
Um,
Okay, whatever.
yeah, I think that it's like there's for some reason you can make like easy books. You can make like kids books that teach kids how to do a book. So you give them The Great Gatsby, and because they've been reading, Percy Jackson or like, the Hardy Boys for their whole childhood and enjoyed them, they know
Bro, that was
the
just you.
I didn't read the Hardy Boys. I never have read a single Hardy Boys book. I was trying to be nice to the people who read other things other than what I read. Um, Percy Jackson I did read. Um,
I don't even know what the Hardy Boys are, to be honest.
it's
I read
like
Magic Treehouse. Shout out to Magic Treehouse. I read Amelia Bedelia.
I don't know who Amelia Bedelia is, but it sounds poetic to me.
Loss. That's your loss, bro. Amelia
Anyways,
Bedelia.
people think the first time the only time you really get approached with poetry these days is in school. Like no one ever is at home, even at my house where my mother is a professor with like a degree in English literature. Like we don't read poems, bro. We don't. I mean, a little bit now that I also study literature, we read poems, but
Mhm.
like we not as a kid we didn't read poems. So I think you show up in class and it's like really hard. So of course,
Yeah, but I feel like the oddball poem is, first of all, they're always taught in school.
mm,
Like I think pretty much regardless of your grade school education, there are some poems that are just so important in what they convey and also what they represent that they are almost always taught in school. Like, Robert Frost is always a name that is like vaguely familiar for most people. Um,
William
or
Carlos.
even if you don't think you know him, you
Yeah,
know? Or I would say, I would argue some like Shakespeare sonnets always like trickle their way in there because, if you're reading Shakespeare very often, you'll also encounter his sonnets. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I guess like I just started off that way because I don't think I really liked or understood or got poetry until college when we took our European Romanticism class, and I think that was the first time in my life I had a poem put before me, and I was like, okay, you know what? I don't understand this. I can't say I know what every word means. No matter how many times I read this, like some of it like makes no sense, but also like I get it. Like I like, like I could read it and I could be like, "Oh, I see
you know
what you're trying to say," you know?
what happened in that class for me with poetry, and what also in the succeeding class we took on lyric imagination and romantic poetry,
Mhm.
which is British romantic poetry. Um, was at first, you put this block of text in front of me, and I would read it, and I'd be like, I don't know what this says. What the hell? And then throughout the conversation with the professor and the way they navigated questions, and lectured and told stories, the poem started to become clear to me. Like I saw when someone else did a close reading in front of me, I understood the close reading. I understood how the poem came to life. And after having like what people teaching me how to do that enough, now just like in the past couple of years, I feel like I've similarly started to be able to look at a poem and be confident enough to say, okay, if I sit down with this poem without help, I can get something out of it. I can really get something out of it and read it slowly and understand what's going on. And that took a long time, a lot of training, a lot of work. So I'm not surprised that like people in elementary in like in high school, you put a poem in front of them and they're like, "What the fuck is this, bro?" Like gibberish, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. No, I think that it was an interesting week to choose poetry too because, just like I mean, all of the things going on in the world, like all of the politics, all of it, like I think that it's really different when you're reading a book like Pride and Prejudice to just get so lost and enveloped in this world of Pride and Prejudice and like Jane Austen or like, whatever book we're reading, Game of Thrones, whatever it is, and kind of like for not necessarily even like forget, but like for the sake of the world or the story, really be able to put aside all of like the superciliousness of novels and stories and like whatever. But like I think reading poetry this week kind of like made something even more important click and like I don't know, maybe we'll be able to get at it once we actually dive into some of these poems and talk about them and also talk about the romantics and what they were kind of aiming at with their poems. But um, I think it go like we've kind of established like a general thesis of like art and books and stories and like why we care about them and what we're trying to do here. But for me, at least, like this question comes up constantly, like whenever I'm reading.
Mhm.
And like I think so often, like it like especially with poems, it's so easy to, be like, can't believe I'm sitting here reading Keats and like Wordsworth right now when, all of this is like going on in the world. And for me, especially this week, it was so hard to like find the peace of mind to like sit down and actually do that. Um, but when I finally did, I found it very illuminating. But before we get into that too much, um,
Right.
the British Romantics, or wait, whatever you want to say.
Well, two things. One, I wanted to say that two things. One, I think what you're saying about poetry and like the question, our thesis about art and stuff, that we need to keep asking that question. That's kind of the thesis, that it needs to be a constant conversation, and particularly with poetry, I think, because poetry is it's a relationship you have with the poetry. You don't get absorbed in the same way, or it's that you do with a story where you can kind of escape into something. Instead, you're always grappling and with the poem. You're always reading and engaging, and it almost becomes physical. It really has a tangible reality, which I think in weeks like this, where there's so much crazy stuff going on in political world in Minnesota and in our country, and um, can be really helpful and good because it gives it poetry really is grounded and it has a reality to it. And in fact, I spent a lot of this afternoon writing some poetry and music um, about a lot of that stuff, and it was fun. Um, do you want to give an introduction on the British Romantics?
I thought you were.
Okay, then I can give a um, okay, Romanticism. We've talked about it before. It really is in Europe the abreaction to the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment in the 1700s is science, the scientific method, the decline of the church. Protestantism is really on the scene now. And it kind of culminates in the French Revolution. You know, if we're going to go with logic, then we're going to have a different political system. We're going to have massive revolution. We're going to have, you know, equal rights. Everyone's going to be a citizen, and that's the logical way of things. But then, of course, the French Revolution really fails. In some, it changes things for sure, but also it's shown that like the peak, the pinnacle of logic, it's alone isn't going to work. You know, Robespierre's Reign of Terror is not what we want. So there's got to be something else. And we go back to Napoleon. So even a lot of the British romantics, for example, Keats, who we're going to start with, but the three people we're talking about today, Danny, they're Keats, Blake, and Wordsworth.
Mhm.
Um, they all lived, I think, between like 1780, 1770, and like 1850. I think Keats was like 1795 to like 1820 or something. Um,
Yeah, I mean, he died like before 30, I think.
5, right?
25, 26, yeah, something like that, yeah.
Cool. Talk about like dying young. Rilke probably loved him. Um, but
But
they all were writing about how poetry can have meaning and how life and beauty can have meaning and truth. We'll talk about truth today in a world in which there isn't kind of a religious significance to art, in a world that's after the Enlightenment, after science, after the scientific method, after the scientific revolution, after the French Revolution. And that's kind of the question, and that they're trying to tackle. And they go about it. We'll talk about how they go about it today. But each of them kind of has different strengths and flaws, and the overarching movement you can make claims about, but there are outliers within it. So I think we should start
yeah,
with,
I
unless you,
mean, they're very often called the British sad boys. And in just one, I mean, I don't even know if it's really a helpful distinction, but they do come like after the German Romantics. So they were inspired by yeah.
no, they come after Sturm which is the pre-Romantic movement in Germany. The German Romantics come after them. Okay, but
Oh?
yeah.
I thought the German Romantic movement was, wait, hold on, pause.
Okay, okay. Should I pause it? We can look it up.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
To the
so we confirmed. Okay, so the British Romantics were in conversation with the Romanticism movement in Germany, which has older roots. Like the Romantic movement started in Germany and but it kind of came in two phases, which Casey was kind of alluding to. Um, and the older Romantics, kind of the more classic Novalis some of these poets. But
Eichendorff,
huh?
Schelling, Schleiermacher, Eichendorff, Tieck, the Schlegel brothers. Those are like the early German, like the Jena Romantic, the Jena circles, they call it, right? And that's about the same time as like Wordsworth and Keats and like Schelling and Byron.
Shelley.
Between
Yeah.
basically kind of from French Revolution, like right before French Revolution through like the end of Napoleon.
Yeah.
That's kind of
And
the
and I think that like it's kind of a helpful framework to think about because like one of the first things you're always taught in literature is like, okay, frames and themes and essence. And then like, as you get more into it, it's okay, like we want to move past like theme and motif and all of these like literary devices when analyzing poetry and these like abstract methods. But I still think that it's helpful to think about because the British Romantics, they sort of have like a different focus, but like the same thing that they're trying to like get at or convey. The German Romantics are much more concerned with like the inner workings of the world as well as the workings of the inner world as well as kind of like generally like they kind of are getting at the uncanny before it's like quite a term. Like kind of things that are like a little bit unsettling or uncomfortable or unhomely. Like a lot of the themes or common like symbols that you see are kind of like, far off distant mountains or thunder or lightning, things like that. Not like ubiquitously, but like these are just like common things that at least like I have seen and I think kind of help paint a picture, right? But the British Romantics, in my opinion, are much more concerned with things like nature. Nature especially, I feel like is very different in the way that it comes up in the German Romantic movement and the way that it comes up in the British Romantic movement. Um, I I don't know, I wonder if you have anything to add to that list. Like,
I mean,
I think that the British, yeah.
wait, explain, because I want to. I know German Romanticism better than I know British Romanticism, and so what's your distinction?
It's not even so much a distinction as it is like they kind of just seem to be interested in different questions of life. Like maybe that's how I would put it. It's like they are both interested in sort of like understanding life, but like in answering different questions.
Hmm. Interesting. I guess, I mean, I think two things. One, there is a big difference. You're right. And it's a really interesting question what the difference is. And, but they are very similar. There's a big difference, but they're very similar. They're more similar than anyone else is to them. So there's probably more similarity than there is difference,
Yeah.
especially in questions. And like they both, nature is a big theme in both of them. But there is a difference in turn, and they all have similar themes of like looking back, similar themes of love, similar themes of death, similar themes of beauty and art. There is a slightly different ways of approaching things. I think the Germans are actually much more interested in the strange, in the uncanny, which is comes from a German. It comes from Freud, a German or an
Well,
Austrian.
that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, yeah. Writing about Hoffman, a romantic author. Um, whereas I think you're right. The British though, I don't know if nature is the right way because Caspar David Friedrich.
Yeah.
He's a German painter, right?
I
He's
I was thinking about like Tinter Abbey
uh,
and the way that nature comes up in like a lot of German romantic poetry, I feel like is more sort of like unsettled. Like it can kind of like do whatever. Like it's not completely ambivalent, right? But the way that it comes up in like especially British poetry, but now I'm thinking about even like Whitman, which is American, so that's different. But like, it's like Tintern Abbey, for example, like nature still has this ability to be like sort of like heartbreaking and like awe-striking, awesome, right? But it doesn't really have the same sort of like I think evil is such a terrible word for it, but like ability to do serious harm and damage in the same way that it does in German romantic poetry. You see what I mean?
no, I think I'm with you. The Germans, I think, they're more violently like the British people. They're sad. They're melancholy. They're very melancholy. Whereas the Germans are more insane and complete
I think both.
arrogant.
It's German sad boys versus
Yeah. There's a
British.
difference. Well, I
There's
want to say
clearly a difference.
British at this point, like they're all coming from this movement that you were talking about, that is a German movement called Sturm und Stress or Sturm und Drang, which is Goethe, who's like the Shakespeare of Germany, and like Schiller, who's like the Marlowe of Germany. Um, and they're the ones who kind of frame the questions. And then from them, you get the British and you get the Germans, and they're kind of contemporaneous. And then you have the Americans, which are like low key, like we know them all. They're like, Emerson, Thoreau, Poe, Whitman, Dickinson, Hawthorne, like, and they're later, like they come afterwards,
Yeah.
and they I think
And
have
they
more in common with the
especially have
British.
like a very spiritual
Yeah,
sort of like almost reverence for nature. and for like, the especially I mean Whitman and Thoreau, like it's really like a romanticization lowercase r versus like I think like I mean the question that I really want to like ask and get at, and it's kind of going to be an unfruitful one before I think we actually dig into the poetry, but like, what, like, why do we still care about these romantics? Like, I wonder why they were so compelling for you in that class and why they remain compelling for us. Because again, like in reading this poetry, like at first I was like, "Oh my gosh," like I can't imagine, you know, trying to convince like someone that this was a fruitful use of their time if they were working like a corporate tech Amazon job, you know? But it just like it also so is, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a little self-selection there. I
Yeah.
I can give you my like the way I would answer that, and then it'll become more clear as we dig into the poetry for
Yeah.
obvious reasons. And the way that I would answer it is, well, as we're going to see with Keats in the first poem, the question that these guys are asking is one of beauty. It's of beauty, and that includes nature, which is natural beauty, and art, which is like human made beauty, but also things like love, or the act of creation. When I make a painting, and why do those things matter in our lives? And I think we oftentimes don't think about the question of like, well, why does that matter? We just dismiss it as it doesn't matter. It's all subjective. It's just for fun. And that's how I think most people working in a tech corporate job would approach poetry. They'd say, "Oh, you do that for fun. Like everyone should have fun hobbies, and hobbies that make your brain work, and maybe you see things a little differently. It has some utility, but you're really doing it for fun." And what the romantics are saying, which is what I think people like you and me, a reason why I'm still super attracted to them is because they're the first people who say, no, well, okay, maybe like the Renaissance or Baroque artists, like Shakespeare say this also, but whatever. They say, no, art and beauty are more than just for fun. They're not just a hobby on the side to be done as for relaxation. There's something that's actually worth it. Um, and not because of their like capacity to make political change or have effect, or because they make you feel good about yourself, but because they have a real value in between the two. And that's a value that's really hard to put a finger on. So we'll have to read through the poems, I think, to get at it.
Yeah.
But that's and they're not always right about that. I don't think that they're always right about what they think that value is.
Mm.
But they know that it's there and they believe that it's there, and I believe that it's there. And so they're really wonderful because you can see that they really know and they want it. And I wanted to say
Yeah.
what we started, which was that British British romanticism, and I've been thinking a lot about the legacy of British literary art, and I think it's really grounded in the creation of like national myth, like fantasy. All the fantasy we know about is like super British. Like Game of Thrones is totally stealing from like Spenser or Chaucer or Milton or Shakespeare. All these things are very mythic-y. They're before the novel, and they have all these mythical, fantastical worlds. Even Blake has his whole like weird world of like Uthun and all of that. Remember?
Mm.
Um, and so I think that there's something to be said about how British poetry is really influenced by these kind of like historical view of fantastical community building. Um,
I mean, but is that different from how it works in
Germany?
any other society
I
about
think
like fantastical myth building? Like, I feel like that's again another thing that is pretty ubiquitous, and like the only thing that really does define a particular society, like, separated from another society is like their collection of myths and stories, among other things, but like really, you know, very often that is like the line that we use to separate
I
one
guess
culture from another culture.
I'm thinking out loud here, but the distinction I'm trying to make is that, like, for example, in German myth,
Casey
this,
just really wants all fantasy to be British. He's like,
well, I don't,
only
there's
only
plenty of
the
fantasy.
British people can have fantasy.
Well,
Nobody else
Americans
can
too,
have
Americans too,
fantasy.
Americans too. No, that Germany as a nation and German myth were
Let's be
really
drinking my
fractured.
tea and think about dragons.
They're really fractured. There are dragons in German myth too, right? But it's like there isn't a national universe of myth. There's just like, oh, Hansel and Gretel, or Little Red Riding Hood, or Cinderella. Those are all German stories. All the Disney stories are German stories, and they're all fantasy, but they're not the same kind of like world. They don't all connect in the same way.
Yes, they
Brett,
do. Have you seen Into the Woods?
Brett,
Dog. They're all
we have
connected.
connected them. Shrek has connected them, but
That's
um,
not true. They were connected before. They were from the same. You
the
literally
Brothers Grimm connected.
live,
But didn't really
you were
connect.
neighbors with the Black Forest. They're totally connected.
Okay, pause. And they're connected in a different way, in a more individual, because Germany, it was connected in a different way. Germany didn't exist until 1870. There was no Germany. There was a bunch of different like German speaking peoples who all spoke their different dialect of Germany. In fact, in Germany today,
No,
there are still really
I
different
think that
dialects.
you're completely correct that it reflects on the society itself. I just am disagreeing with you because it's more entertaining than agreeing with you. Okay, now
Let it be known. Let it be known that
it's
that just like we can frame that moment. But we should like that could be a YouTube clip, Danny. I'm just disagreeing with you because it's more fun to disagree with you. But Britain has has always been like this mythical nation of like it's an island, it's all this stuff, and I think it's interesting to see how that kind of community community and is what I'm really talking about affects the way they have poetry. We'll go into it with that.
yeah, no, totally. Totally, totally.
But we're doing British romanticism today, Danny. And what's our first poem?
So our first poem is Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. Keats was, I mean, as we mentioned before, he died extremely young. And he I don't know actually like a ridiculous amount about his past. I just know that he's famous for two things, some really excellent poetry, and also a letter to his brothers in which he is talking about some poem and he uses this term called negative capability. And he explains kind of what he means by negative capability, which is the ability of good art to kind of sit in uncomfortable in-betweens without trying to like reach sticky or uncertain sort of or I guess such a good word for it. It's like sticky but like annoying conclusions or like something like that. So and this is still used like so often in um literary criticism because it really is true that, and in some respects it kind of like shapes what we think of as like subjectivity or like subjective art. Like, like good art should be sort of like different and have like multifaceted meanings for different people kind of thing. Um, but I think that the actual thing that he was getting at is that there is some truth. There is some truth in art, but good art is able to sort of have like multiple truths in case rather than just like on its face being like, this is what I mean and this is what I'm saying. And I mean, we've talked about negative capability in essence, I think many times, but like that is like actually the term for it. So anyways, he's known for that, and also he was just a cool guy, I imagine. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know that much about him, to be
He
honest.
was like, to fill in, I think he was like always had money problems. Like he was not famous during his lifetime, really, but he only published like 50 poems, or like 50, and was always kind of broke and then got super sick. I'm assuming it was tuberculosis because it was always tuberculosis, but it could have been something else. Um, and then died, and then he got really famous afterwards.
Hmm.
So very tragic story.
Yeah, a very tragic story because, I mean, all the poems that he wrote were quite remarkable at, such a young age. So can't even imagine what else he was capable of. But anyways, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Do you want to switch off reading it or should I read all of it?
Sure. Do you do a paragraph? I do a paragraph.
Let's do that. Okay.
Do
So
you
I'll
want
start.
to read the whole thing and then analyze it, or do you want to read paragraph paragraph and analyze paragraph by paragraph?
Let's go paragraph by paragraph.
Yeah, I'm with that.
So the essence of this poem basically is he's writing about a Grecian urn, which like back in the day they were used for storing water and like actual usage, but they also had these other like cool usages like to tell stories, especially mythic stories, which were often like painted on the urns. So, yes.
Wait. Urn also is where you put the ashes of dead people.
Yeah, yeah, that should be, yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, Slivian historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme, what leaf-firing legend haunts about thy shape? Of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or dales of Arcady. What men or gods are these? What maidens loth? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy?
Hmm. Well, there's a lot there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this first paragraph really just um like sets up the kind of pursuit that is happening on this urn. So at least my understanding is that he's sort of imagining a Grecian urn in which there are two lovers painted in constant pursuit. And this man is always running towards this maiden. And he's kind of also setting up a mystical landscape. So Tempe and Dales of Arcady are both like these mystical lands in mystical valleys, I believe, in Greece. And they're just, known for their beauty and all of that. So those are like the nature themes that we see here. So like he's kind of looking back to this like, mystical, perfect, like almost Garden of Eden-esque landscape in which a maiden is being chased by a lover in constant pursuit. But, as it becomes even more important through the rest of the poem, they are in constant pursuit, and the lover will never catch his maiden.
So I think there are two really, really cool things. Firstly, you've all seen, whoever's watching this, I guarantee you, you've seen one of these urns before. They're like the orange ones with the black paint, like classic, like Greek urn. You go to any museum ever, they have them. It's just the clay pot. Um, Something we didn't talk about in our romanticism overview, Danny, is the relationship of ancient Greece to romantics, because the romantics are kind of they're kind of post-Christian. They are obviously still in Europe and it's still pretty Christian, but they don't there's atheism or criticism of the church is starting to become a really big thing. People are not so no longer is like Christianity just assumed. People aren't like super believing in God. For example, Hegel in 1804 already says God is dead. Of course, Nietzsche says it much more famously like 80 years later or whatever. Um, so Greece and specifically if you would trust Nietzsche, which I do, pre-Socratic Greece, so Greece before Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, so like the Oedipus Rex, all of the Oedipus plays from Sophocles, or like the Lesbos, whatever was her name. What's the it's with an
Sappho?
X. Sappho. That all of the
Lesbos.
sorry,
Dog.
she's
Dog.
she's the one lesbian one. I forgot. My bad, my bad. Hey, I'm fallible here. Okay. Um. Anyways, all of those are pre-Socratic, and what they really admire about this time is that they were able to believe in the truth of art, like art, in a urn or whatever, was divine. It was divine. It had the meaning, and without it having to have this like Christian, it comes from the one singular God. Because
Right.
remember, what's the difference between Greek gods and like the one God of Christianity? There's two big differences. One, there's a bunch of Greek gods, and two, they take human form and they show up on Earth and do shit, which you can see in this
Yeah.
poem, where
And
it's
also, God in like the God sense is supposed to be omniscient.
yeah,
And I think the other thing that they sort of really um valued about like, Greek myths and also just like, they were kind of like Grecophiles. Like, they just really loved the whole cultural like idea that God can not only be like fallible, just like humans, but also that like gods can be like completely that and that God is like, in apparent in art and in poetry and in storytellers. But also, I think that like my caveat to this would kind of be like the romantics are really, really, really obsessed with looking back, with even things like childhood, you
yeah.
know? And into, I mean, that's why they kind of get the name. It's like romanticizing this like Greek past where everything was more perfect and people actually valued what was meant to be valued. I think that there's
Today,
a lot of, fallibility, for lack of a better word, to that argument.
yeah. No, I agree. I think that it's a lot of it's like, oh, it's so much better at this time, but like, was it?
We don't
Maybe
know.
it was. I think that the idea is that it was, and I applaud the idea, but we don't know. And I wanted to say that in this poem, we get, like in this first paragraph, we get a lot of that. We get the what men or gods are these? We see that they're both men and gods. It's unclear. These are divine people. They're like angels, in this. And then we see one other thing which we didn't really mention, which is this is low-key assault. Um, like the struggle to escape. Like, I think this is one of those Greek poems where it's like the god is trying to have sex with the nymph, and the nymph is like running away, and then because they don't want to have sex with the god.
But
Um,
it does seem that in this case, the woman can be read as either uninterested and sort of like ambivalent or like actively like trying to flee from this pursuit. But either way, it kind of classifies like love as this thing of wild ecstasy.
yeah.
It's completely irrational. Like even if this like girl doesn't want you, you've convinced yourself that stop. Why does this always happen, dog?
You just
Um, You've convinced yourself that she does, and so you're chasing her in this mild pursuit, and pipes and timbrels, like you're bringing along like your instruments, like you're trying to woo her, um, and like there's quite a few Greek myth stories like this. I mean, we talked about Ovid not even that long ago, um, where like love just completely has the ability to drive people entirely mad. And that is kind of what it's about. Do you mind if I go pee really fast?
go pee.
Mhm.
All right, we're going. We're back. I'm going to read the next paragraph here, and then we can talk about love and music.
Yay.
Heard, okay. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on. Not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit deities of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss. Thou winning near the goal yet, do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair.
I mean, there's a lot
Everyone has to
there.
look at this poem and look at the punctuation and the shape of it, because the shape is really good, and there's a lot of punctuation that I couldn't get across in tone. Like there's a colon after pipe to the spirit deities of no tone, colon, and then he lists them. Fair youth beneath or it's kind of like the punctuation is good. It's more than just the saying of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I also just like love this first line. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter.
Yeah.
And the way, I mean, he indents that too, but like it's just I mean, I think to the dismay of most artists, that's kind of true. I think in this paragraph, the first paragraph, he's sort of setting up the like contention between the lovers, and the second paragraph has much more to do with um, art and beauty more broadly. And in his imagination, he's imagining the song that the lover is playing to the maiden, and he like this imagined song is so much sweeter, just like I think that the things that we can imagine that we create, the songs that are imagined that would be just so perfect, always feel sweeter than I think the ones that always exist. Like, so often you're like itching for a song and it feels like there's no song that can fit. And then sometimes there's like that perfect moment where, a song plays and it just like it fits the moment entirely perfectly. But so often it's the opposite, you know. But I think that here he kind of implores that we like play on. We keep writing, we keep singing, we keep making music, because even though the like imagined theoretical music is more perfect, it's better, that doesn't mean that we should like stop trying to make songs or make music, or make art or make whatever.
So
Um,
it's really
was kind of
interesting.
my interpret.
Sorry. I think it's
Go
a
ahead.
weird in between that he's trying to strike here. In this, you're right, this first three or four lines, but until the spirit ditties of no tone. Because he's saying play, but don't play too much. Because, melodies that we hear are nice, but the fact that there is the potential for something that hasn't yet happened, but that could happen, is even better. And that's what makes it more powerful. That, for example, and this is what I think negative capability is. This is why negative capability is helpful. Negative capability is like saying or illuminating something by saying nothing, or saying something that isn't all-encompassing because it opens the door towards um, towards something new, towards the capacity for things for possibility, right? So there's so much possibility in this urn he's looking at in this image. Wow, they could fall in love. These two people in the midst of their act of chasing and stuff, they could have children, they could have a whole family, they could have sex, they could kiss. Um, and because they're frozen in that moment, and because it's an urn from like 3,000 years ago, whatever, the potential is there. And that's what he's talking about. He's like, look at the potential in this story is so amazing. That's why you never want to finish a fantasy story. You know, it's always on to the next adventure. It's never like closed. It's always moving. It always opens up or it always ends open-ended because you want to be able to keep on imagining in your head the possibility for it to go further. Um, and I think he also though talks about that when it comes to, love and the fact that like love ends always and always ends poorly, as Danny would say. Um,
I would
and
not say that. I mean, in my, I guess kind of what I was getting at is like, you know, and I think honestly this comes up even more in love and in choice. Like so often there's kind of the feeling of like, maybe something else would be better, or maybe this or that would be better. Like the unheard melodies are always sweeter, you
Mhm.
know? Um, like, but
Dream.
yeah, I mean, continue to dream, but also like play on, Like this lover isn't necessarily like thinking about all of the things that like possibly could be, you know? Because he can't. He's fixed in his chase. Um, if that kind of makes sense. Like this to me felt like he was kind of like speaking to all the artists, because there's so that feeling of like, well, sometimes a blank page is just sweeter because what you can imagine on there is so much better than sometimes what you can actually put.
I mean, the other thing, huh? I guess I don't know exactly yet. I'll think about it more. What when Keats says, "Pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone." He says, "Pipe not to the sensual ear, play on not to the sensual ear," which is like not just for your hearing, not for your senses, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. I don't. That's a really hard thing because there's a colon there, and then he says, "Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare." Right? And so there's a lot of death in that. The trees are never going to winter. They're never going to die. Um,
I mean,
but
I think that the last line.
they,
Yeah, the last line of this is also setting up something really interesting about the maiden. She cannot fade, though thou hast thy bliss. Thou forever will thou love, and she be fair. So, it's kind of this I think this is the poem that set up the question that we kept alluding back to in that class about the plastic flowers.
yeah.
And like if a rose that can never die, a plastic rose is can ever be as beautiful or as nice of a gift as a rose that does wilt and die. And we were talking about graveyards and how like a lot of graveyards have rules about like leaving plastic flowers or like bringing plastic flowers and why that might be. Um, and that's like one of the reasons, like that's one of the reasons why I love peonies so much, is because they're such an ephemeral flower, like they only come about at a certain time of the year, and when they are gone, they're completely gone. And I think that's also why, like the sakura, the cherry blossom, like
Yeah.
it is such an important and beautiful symbol for so many people. But like especially in Japan, it's the symbol of the kamikaze pilots, or of this like the Sakura festival where for that like week or two when they're in full bloom, everyone comes out and sort of like picnics beneath them. Um, because like once they're gone, they're completely gone, and they all go at the same time all together. It's fleeting, and that's like part of what makes them so special and so beautiful.
Yeah, no, totally. It's maybe the only thing that makes them special is that they're fleeting. I think, Danny, let's move to the next paragraph. Would you maybe read the next two?
Okay.
Because I think that the next one we only would need to talk about. We don't. We could talk about it, but it's the one after that we should maybe skip to. So, but read through the whole maybe.
Okay. Ah, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new, more happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead, and a parching tongue. Next paragraph. Um, who are these coming to sacrifice? To what green altar? O mysterious priest, lead least thou that heifer lowing at skies, and all her silken flanks with garland dressed, what little town by river or seashore or mountain built with peaceful citadel is emptied of this folk, this pious morn, and little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art as ab why thou art desolate can ever return.
Okay. Wow, a lot there. The what I wanted to say from the first one, other than I think a lot of it's just kind of inc more of what we've talked about before, but the end, this word cloyed. Cloyed means like I think check me, but I think it means like too much good stuff has come and you're now sick because you've been like the all
Yeah,
this
I
rich
it's
food
up.
has made you sick or something, but not only with food. So it's kind of a sickness. It's a which is a burning forehead, fever, a parching tongue, sickness. It's also madness. It's a little bit like there's too much good and you become sick and mad and gross. And I think that's an interesting, I think it's about there a little bit about um hedonism and the need for it, what you were saying about plastic flowers, Danny, the need for it to actually die. That too much of a good like if the cherry blossoms lasted forever, they wouldn't be as beautiful as they are.
Yeah. Nor ever bring the spring adieu. And also this, yeah, this the madness of passion and kind of like the um cloyed feeling that comes with too much of a good thing, something that never is fleeting. But we can move to the second paragraph
What do you make
where
of this?
he kind of like pushes back and shows us instead this like empty little town by a river, this pious landscape, and especially the last paragraph, will silent be and not a soul to tell. Um, seems like he's kind of asking about like, okay, uh, like I took this to kind of be like the if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, is it still um like
Mhm.
does it matter, at all? Um yeah, I don't know.
Interesting. I mean, I think you're right that this is the turn in the poem, or maybe the paragraph before the end, the cloyed bit, the a burning forehead and a parching tongue, is the like, wait a second, this urn, which we've been saying, oh, it's so beautiful, it's infinite. No, this urn is excruciating, because it's infinite, because it's dead, because it's not alive, because it's in stone. You want it to be alive so bad. You want Greece to actually happen. Um, but no, it has you need the sacrifice. And so and I don't when they're talking about the sacrificing of a cow, um, in like a
Hmm.
little town, and the people, the folk of this tiny little town, they're mourning for the sacrifice of the cow or, or, of the things that are over. Or, 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 of the things that are over. Or, or, of the things that are over. 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 Or, And,
Yeah, but
and then
there's
this
no
bit here
ability to tell.
that you said, can error return, which I think means cannot return,
Yeah.
um, which is a big theme in Romanticism, which we've been talking about. But really, we need to talk about Schiller a little bit and his Garden of Eden and sentimentality.
Right, right. Sentimental versus the naive.
Exactly. That like once you become self-conscious, once you realize that there is no such thing as, you know, Zeus walking around turning into swans, um, you can't forget that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah. Do you want to read the next one?
Sure, I can read the last one. This will be the end. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with bread of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou silent form dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know. I told you we'd talk about truth.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, and as doth eternity, cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste. So, he is, I think, like, with the second to last paragraph, he's pushing back to, this, like, quaint little town. And then in this last one, he's pushing back even further to eternity and this generation. And again, kind of mourning, um, this uh this urn that will, you know, live on for way past this generation, um, way past way past us. And then the last part is especially interesting because um the he kind of imagines this urn saying to us, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. So again, it creates this really interesting moment because the romantics have this belief in beauty and in truth um and in art. Um, but it also is really interesting that it's like in quotes because
Yeah.
when you
Comes
put, I think like again, like when you put such a hard point on something like that, it kind of loses its meaning because it becomes the kinds of things that the romantics are against, like the Enlightenment and like religion, you know? And like beauty and art so easily become a religion or for political um points, rather than and in step away from the truths that I think are potentially possible in them. Casey is
my
grabbing
computer, so we're plugging it in.
Casey's grabbing his charger.
Um,
Um,
but I wanted to say one thing about this last bit, which is the line about the cold pastoral. Pastoral poetry is kind of a thing that comes from Greece. It comes from like shepherds who obviously the shepherd's job is like, all right, go out with the sheep. The sheep are gonna eat all day. and you're gonna have a dog, and you and the dog are just gonna chill with the sheep while they eat grass, and don't let the wolves eat the sheep. So what you do all day is you sit and you wander in the hills. So a lot of shepherds, like, what they would do is like make up songs or make up poems or make up stories because they'd be sitting there doing nothing all day, but they need to watch, you know? Um, but they don't need to watch that hard. They have a dog to help them, you know? So they have the shepherd's pipe. They play music while they could or talk. And so, but it's kind of this idea that like the way you live life, you entertain yourself with things you find really meaningful while you kind of wait for the sheep to eat so you can eat them later. But it's a cold pastoral. And I think that what is meant by that is that it's hard. Because usually pastoral is kind of this idealized, oh, it's so nice. Pastorals are beautiful, like pastoral landscape. You have no, it's super easy. You're just used to like make things. No. What he's saying is that that kind of entertainment that the shepherd is doing in their life is something that we also do in our lives. And but that it's a really hard duty. It's a really hard job. It's cold. It's cold. You're shivering, and you have to warm yourself up, and you have to work at it. Um, and
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. I think in this last paragraph he's really reflecting on like what it on art itself, on beauty itself, and what it means to like make art and care about this art. Not only is it like hard and difficult, and there's all this like romanticization, I think kind of what he's getting at with this village and this town where things are unheard and unseen. He, like playing like nobody's watching, like playing like these shepherds and creating in this like cold pastoral wasteland sort of, and like that somehow being more authentic and true art. Um, and there is some truth to it, like what you do when nobody's watching. But also, uh, it's cold, it's difficult, and like this town, it's desolate, because nobody's around to see what happens. And that is something that matters, and that is something that matters especially in art, because I think that that is when you have like really special moments of seeing, you know? Um, and this last line, I mean, like, I, I think about it all the time. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye on that is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Um, because I think like for a long time I just thought beauty is truth, truth beauty. And that was kind of the first moment of like realization for me that, this kind like poetry and the romantics and like what they're grappling with, like it has meaning, like it still has meaning, like these very important questions of being human. But he seems to be alluding to something that is a little bit more complicated and also true, which is, that there's a limit to what we need to know, which is interesting, and also what we can know. And those are two things that are like, of course, entirely in opposition to the Enlightenment, which was like very hell-bent set on, we can know everything there is to know if we just science the fuck out of it, you know?
this is interesting. It's reminding me of my friend who said to me the other day, we were chatting, that their biggest fear in life is they said they had a recurring dream where the aliens invaded and they needed to figure out some scientific problem and they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't understand the science and his whole family was dying. So biggest fear, people that he loves, but also that the biggest fear is that he can't understand something. That's his biggest fear. And I think that's a really telling of the like logic. I bet Danny knows who I'm talking about. of the universe. And of contemporary kind of scientific culture. That is the biggest fear, not being able to know. We can't admit that we don't know or that we won't be able to know. And that's okay. That's a good thing. In fact, that is what is amazing about it, that we don't know, that it's an infinitely possible thing. Um, I think
Yeah.
we've been going for a while, so what if we jump to one of the next poems? We don't we do Blake really quick? Because I think it actually ties in pretty well with this.
Okay, let's do the Pebble and the Clod, and then we're gonna call it for today because yeah, I mean it's crazy how much there's to talk about with one poem. And I mean, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's just do it.
Do
You
Pebble and
start.
Clyde? We'll do
Wanna
it really
read it?
quick.
Yeah,
Sure, I'll read it. Well, unless you want to read it.
you read it.
The Clod and the Pebble by William Blake. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself have any care, but for another give its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sung a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet. But a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. She goes crazy. I'm sorry. It's cool. So
Dude, it makes me laugh every time. I mean, like, I think that because we're kind of familiar with it, the meaning is very apparent. But basically, um, there is this little clod of clay, that is trodden with the cattle's feet. So it means like literally like stuck under these cows being stomped on by them. Like, can you imagine a more miserable life than a little clod of clay that is always being stomped on by a bunch of cows? Probably not. And then there's this little pebble that, is of the brook that probably has like a little nice, lovely view, you know. But it's a pebble, like it's a pebble. Um, and the clod of clay sings this little song about love and kind of the joys of love. Love seeketh not itself to please, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. But the pebble, you know, um, basically sings the opposite song. Love seeketh only itself to please, to bind another in its to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite.
so the pebble is very down on love, and the clod is very up on love. And the clod is like, love is this amazing capacity to bring people together, empathy, we care for each other. And even though our world sucks, even though we love and are and for another, we can build beauty in heaven in this thing. Except for that this clod is a clod and he's getting squashed by cattle. And he's keeps getting beaten up, you know? Um, so there's clearly like a critique of that kind of way of being in there. But then, of course, the pebble is like the most narcissistic thing ever, or not narcissistic, pessimistic thing ever. Love
Mhm.
is terrible. Love is only about like, lust or like making someone, owning someone, like marriage, like, and is actually how we make the world, make our lives so much worse. And I love that line, builds a hell in heaven's despite. I think it's really, really
Yeah.
serious.
And seeketh only itself to please, not joys in another's loss of ease. And I think that this sort of relationship is way easier when you think about like romantic love, you know. And I think it kind of gets at this other thing with these like romantics, like I think um like love is it's crazy the way that we treat it, because it's always given this sort of like triviality, like it doesn't matter, that it's sort of like supercilious, like just not important. Um, but like also we give it such an emphasis not only in like thoughts but also in our very way of being with with family, with people, with connection, with whatever, and it's kind of just funny because we all mostly seem to have like this understanding that like at the end of the day there are certain things that matter and certain things that don't, you know, but also overtly when you say something like that you sound like a clod of clay, right?
Totally.
And also like uh, in many ways, living in that way exclusively like makes you a clod of clay,
Yeah.
but to be a pebble and to like forsake those things that feel sort of silly and unimportant and pretend that you don't care about them is not only idealized and like respected, but also more rational
Hmm.
and um, and what's crazy about this too is like both of them don't say anything that isn't true in the sense that like both perspectives really have a lot of justification behind them, in some sense, because love can totally be a hell, you know? Um, and yeah. I mean, just what a poem. Like it's so cute, it's so funny, it's so quippy, but it's also like just so true.
What I really love about it is that it manages to like show how both sides are wrong, both, and I think that it's interesting that the pebble is, warbling because the pebble is drowned, the pebble's underwater, the pebble's living in a delusionary world where things are all rational, but it's not. It's not clear. The pebble is not clear. And also the pebble's rock, it's solid, it can't move, it can't think otherwise, it can't see things, it can't see reality. Whereas, the clod is so the loosey goosey, doesn't have that same rational thing. And like what you were saying about love and being like, oftentimes he's critiquing like what the colloquial term romantic means. And I remember when we were in class, we were discussing this, Danny. One of our professors asked we had two professors when they were discussing this, and one of them asked the other professor, "Well, do you think he's rooting for the Claude or the Pebble?" And the other professor said, "Well, I think he's rooting for the Claude, but I think he wishes the Claude would, be a little more stiff, and fight back against those cow's feet." And so I always think about that when I think about this poem and how,
That's
yeah,
fun.
I think it is about the Claude. The Claude is the way. It just needs to have a little more firmament, okay? So be a firm
Yeah.
Claude.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a lovely way to end this. I mean, like now I just want to like go give my mom a hug and like eat some of her food. But, it's true. It's true. It's like I think that the romantics obsess a lot about like very like morbid things and they like simultaneously are against justifications for all of this, but long for them and long for the past, and long for a future where people are more Claude-like maybe. But like I don't know. But they always kind of like come back and meet on like this point of like love, and
Yeah,
not just like romantic love. And there's so many contentions about what that actually means, but
I'm
I think
sure.
everybody kind of knows, you know?
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for staying with us this week. I'm sorry we didn't get to Mr. Wordsworth. Maybe we'll return to him another day. But this is what happens when you talk about poetry. What can we say? Also, Danny and I are yappers. But yeah, see you next week. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.